The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the Man from Leng. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, I am reviewing the Mystic cards in For the Greater Good, the third Mythos pack in the Circle Undone cycle. There are spoilers throughout if you care about that sort of thing. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's get started. The first Mystic card in the pack is an upgrade for Enchanted Blade. It's a 3-cost asset that costs 3 experience points. It has a willpower and combat skill icon and the item, relic, weapon, and melee traits. It enters play with 4 charges. It has the game text Fight. You get +2 combat skill value for this attack. As an additional cost to use this ability, you may spend up to 2 charges to empower the blade. For each charge spent this way, you get +1 combat and deal +1 damage for this attack. Much like their Guardian counterparts, Mystic Investigators receive several perks for upgrading to their version of Enchanted Blade 3. The card comes with an additional willpower skill icon and an additional charge for a total of 4, 5 if you're playing Akachi. Mystics also receive +2 combat skill value out of the gate rather than +1 with the option to add an additional +1. The Mystic Enchanted Blade basically has the same action as its level 0 counterpart, with the exception that you may spend up to 2 charges to empower it. A fully empowered Enchanted Blade 3 hits for +4 combat and +2 damage, which is enough to take down a 3 health enemy in one attack. The drawback here is that Enchanted Blade 3 enters play with only 4 charges, so you can only take down 2 3 health enemies before it runs out of juice. Recharge, a free Mystic event from A Phantom of Truth, will let you add 3 additional charges to Enchanted Blade 3. Keep in mind, however, that if you reveal a Chaos token with a Skull Cultist Tablet, Elder Thing, or Tentacle symbol, you'll destroy the blade instead. You can mitigate this risk somewhat by playing Premonition, a free Mystic event from Heart of the Elders. It lets you seal a token, which then becomes your next pull from the Chaos bag. Unfortunately, Premonition is a one-shot event, so if you reveal a special token and seal it on Premonition, you're back to pulling blindly when you play your recharge. Like its level 0 counterpart, Enchanted Blade 3 still has the Relic trait, making it an ideal weapon to deal with Poltergeists and Wraiths. That said, Poltergeists and Wraiths are also vulnerable to spells, so the Relic trait isn't as valuable here as it is on the Guardian version of this card. The blade also takes up a hand slot and an arcane slot, which isn't great if you intend to pack your deck with spells. If you'd like to play Enchanted Blade 3 in combination with spells such as Sixth Sense and Shriveling, you may want to include Sign Magic, the 3-cost asset from the secret name that lets you sacrifice your other hand slot for an additional arcane slot. I could see Diana Stanley, Jim Culver, and possibly Akachi Anyele taking a shine to Enchanted Blade 3. All 3 investigators have a combat skill value of 6 and deal 2 damage if they empower the blade once. That should be enough to deal with most 4 fight 2 health enemies on standard difficulty, depending on the makeup of the Chaos bag, of course. If they need a little more oomph, these investigators can empower the blade twice to get to 7 combat and 3 damage. The option to recharge the blade is nice, although I definitely pack Premonition to mitigate the risk of blowing up the blade instead in the process. Most other Mystics who can use the blade have above average willpower and below average combat, a skill spread that really lends itself to traditional Mystic spells rather than hand-to-hand combat. The second Mystic card in the pack is an upgrade for Scroll of Secrets. It's a 1-cost asset that costs 3 experience points. It has willpower and intellect skill icons and the item and tome traits. It enters play with 4 secrets. As an additional action, you may exhaust Scroll of Secrets and spend 1 secret to look at the top or bottom card of any investigator's deck or the encounter deck, then either discard that card, add it to its owner's hand, place it on the bottom of its deck, or place it on top of its deck. Scroll of Secrets takes up a hand slot. Much like its Seeker counterpart, Scroll of Secrets 3 is like a mashup of Old Book of Lore and Scrying, Seeker and Mystic assets from the core set respectively. Old Book of Lore lets you look at the top 3 cards of an investigator's deck and draw one of those cards. The other 2 get shuffled back into the deck. Scrying, on the other hand, lets you look at the top 3 cards of either an investigator's deck or the encounter deck and then return them to the top of the deck in any order. Scroll of Secrets 3 gives you an extra willpower skill icon, an extra secret, and it lets you look at either the top or bottom card of the encounter deck or an investigator's deck. Once you're done, you may discard it or place it on the top or bottom of the deck. Scroll of Secrets 3 requires a hand slot, so it doesn't compete with other Mystic assets for that arcane slot, and competition for that arcane slot is extremely fierce at the moment. It also uses secrets, which are easier to come by than charges if you play it in combination with Enraptured or Truth from Fiction from the Boundary Beyond. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure which Mystic or Offcast Mystic would be interested in Scroll of Secrets 3. Personally, I really dislike the idea of spending an action to look at the top or bottom card of either my deck or the encounter deck. It might be worthwhile if you got lucky and saw a weakness which you could then discard, but the odds of that happening with any consistency are pretty remote. Daisy Walker could get around the action restriction since the scroll is a tome, but she can't play level 3 Mystic cards, so that is out of the question. You could use the scroll to peek at the top card of the encounter deck before you play Drawing to the Flame, but by doing so, you're pretty much sacrificing any of the tempo that you may have gained by playing Drawing to the Flame in the first place, so that's not ideal either. If you've got your heart set on making Scroll of Secrets 3 work, you would probably need to combine it with another deck manipulation effect, such as the aforementioned Scrying 0 from the core set, or Scrying 3 from the Pallid Mask, to make it more effective. If you stack either your deck or the encounter deck with Scrying, you could use the scroll to discard nasty surprises, such as weaknesses or difficult enemies, before you draw them. The problem with this plan is that unless you're using Scrying 3, it requires 2 actions. If I'm reluctant to spend 1 action to trigger the scroll, it's highly unlikely that I'm going to spend 2. The other Mystic card that lets you look at the top card of either the encounter deck or an investigator's deck is Alyssa Graham from Undimensioned and Unseen. You could use Alyssa's free triggered ability to peek at the top card of either deck. Rather than using Alyssa's ability, which requires you to add a doom to her, you could use the scroll to draw the card, discard it, or send it to the bottom of the deck as necessary. Now, Norman Withers may have some use for the Scroll of Secrets 3 if he plays it in combination with his signature asset, Split the Angle. Norman could use the scroll to rig the top card of either his deck or the encounter deck, then use the free triggered ability on Split the Angle to discard both. Unfortunately, you're still spending an action as part of this combination. You can do something similar if you play Split the Angle in combination with Alyssa Graham, and that particular combination does not require an action. If I've read the game text on Scroll of Secrets several times since it was spoiled in the FFG's preview article, because I feel as though I'm missing some interaction that would warrant playing this card. Perhaps there is nothing there to miss, and Scroll of Secrets 3 is simply a card without a home for the time being. I'm not convinced that manipulating 1 card in either the encounter deck or any investigator's deck is worth an action. As a solo player, I have a lot of trouble wrapping my head around the idea of spending 4 actions to trigger this card 4 times during a scenario. It might be worthwhile if you know what you're going to see ahead of time, but now we're getting into some elaborate combination territory. An elaborate combination, I might add, that doesn't really advance your win condition. Perhaps we'll see some more cards down the line that will support Scroll of Secrets 3, but for now I think I'm going to leave this one alone. That's going to do it for my review of the Mystic cards in For the Greater Good. After the amazing pack that was the Wages of Sin, this pack is going to be something of a letdown for Mystics. As much as I like the Mystic version of Enchanted Blade 3, I think there are relatively few investigators who will be champing up at the bit to upgrade it. The Mystic class is still very much about using willpower to fight, investigate, and evade, so a card such as Enchanted Blade 3 is going to struggle to gain traction until we see more Mystic investigators like Diana Stanley who can't use willpower to solve all of their problems. It also makes a nice upgrade for Jim Culver, who sometimes takes Machete instead. You could play this, the Enchanted Blade 3. As for Scroll of Secrets 3, I'm at a bit of a loss. When I review the list of investigators who may play this card, none of them really jump out and scream, "The scroll belongs in my deck!" The last time I played this sort of deck manipulation archetype, I played it out of Norman Withers, so perhaps there's something there. That said, Norman's intellect is so good that discovering clues as quickly as possible was just a better use of my time than trying to rig the encounter deck. Perhaps Scroll of Secrets 3 is just waiting for the right investigator to shine. That's going to do it for this review. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromleng@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromleng. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.